So hello there and welcome to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And it's the first podcast of 2021. So happy new year to all of you lovely that tune into these podcasts. And it's episode 50 as well. We're halfway through the century. And I almost lost count. I mean, I know I'm the one that do the thumbnails on this, but so to remind myself of what episode we're up to, but I'm just absolutely flabbergasted that we're up to episode 50 already. It just feels like it's gone in a blur, but an absolute huge milestone for us. And for anyone that's tuned into any episode of this podcast, thank you so much for following us on this journey so far. We've certainly got plenty more to look forward to in the coming weeks and months that will follow. And of course, as always, my name is Adam. I'm the host here of the DNF1 F1 podcast, and joining me, my co-host, the lovely and sharp-looking Mr. Courtney Pine. Courtney, first things first, Happy New Year to you as well. Hard to feel positive given everything that's been going on, not just in the UK, but of course in the sporting and F1 world as well. It's not been easy dealing with the winter lull, but how are you doing?
First of all, I'd like to wish everyone that's listening or watching a Happy New Year. Last year was an awful one. But I must say, as tough as things may appear right now, particularly if you have the news on or you haven't been hiding underneath a rock, as tough as it is now, I do have a lot of optimism for 2021. Whether it be later on in the year, I have a lot of optimism for once, and I hope that you hang on in there because things will be getting better.
Absolutely, well said. And I think us as podcasters and YouTubers, I suppose, if you want to add that as well, have an obligation or a duty, I suppose, at times like this to try and provide our lovely followers and subscribers, all 131 of you at this point. So keep adding to that number if you can. If you're new to the channel, definitely subscribe. But we have a duty to try and keep you guys entertained. And I hope that for what it's worth, if it's once or twice a week that we upload content, and of course we'll be planning to upload more in the next few months, we keep you entertained to some degree, or at least more well informed for an hour a week or however many episodes that we do in the week. But nonetheless, of course, in this winter break, it's never boring if you are a Formula One fan in terms of content, in terms of news that's going on. There's always stuff that's going along. And we don't do many episodes where we focus on the gossip column, if you like, as other sports tend to be obsessed with it on a weekly basis. But Formula One is a bit different, where we don't often get to look into the gossip columns exclusively and try and pull out news stories and discuss those. And in this episode, we're going to break that trend, and we're actually going to focus purely on this one. And there's no better place to start, Courtney, than with the future of Lewis Hamilton, who, as of right now, is technically unemployed. Mr. Sir Lewis Hamilton. Of course, congratulations for him, a very well-deserved honour. And of course, we did an episode discussing on whether we felt that was deserved or not. So of course, I'm going to leave a card up there, just pointing up, as I did in the last episode, to direct your attention to that episode, which of course was our second episode to hit 1,000 views. So thank you very much to everyone who's actually tuned in to watch that on YouTube. We really appreciate your support, but it's a really good discussion on the topic. But Sir Lewis, as I think plenty of us will prefer to call him going forward, it'd be interesting to see what they call him amongst his peers in the paddock. But yeah, as I've mentioned already, currently unemployed. And of course, in talks with Mercedes over his current contract. And imagine, Lewis being on holiday or being with his family at the moment is probably more concerned about that than his Mercedes contract being negotiated. But it seems that the news are coming out with a lot of reports, Courtney, that there seems to be a few little details that need to be ironed out, and perhaps not everything is as peachy as we initially assumed it would be. Of course, the main headlines at the moment are saying that Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, or Daimler, as it's probably more attributed to them that run the Mercedes F1 team, at least from a business perspective, are in a bit of a stigma or a bit of a stalemate, I should say, over the current negotiations. So from what we understand, and we're just basically going by the similar sources that have been put out to what everyone else can see. Motorsport.com, I think, was the ones that ran the story on this, Italian-based Motorsport.com. And what they're saying is that, there seems to be a bit of a stalemate in negotiations between Hamilton himself and Daimler over the money that's going to be given to Lewis on an annual basis, some bonuses and some other stuff, etc., and also the length of the contract. What we understand is that Daimler have offered Lewis up to 40 million euros a year, plus a 10% bonus if Lewis Hamilton wins the World Championship in that season. Also a free car, as if Lewis Hamilton needed another car. Not sure if that's an enticement for him, considering the one that he currently drives, for a job at least. And Lewis himself, I think Lewis is probably haggling out for a bit more money and also a longer contract. So clearly Mercedes, from what we understand, are not offering Lewis the sort of length of contract that he was hoping for, which, given that we were concerned, Courtney, of Lewis stay, or whether or not Lewis was going to stay in Formula One for much longer, perhaps that's a positive that Lewis himself looks like he's not happy with the length of contract that he's being offered. Forgetting the money and that aside, what are your thoughts on this situation, Courtney? I mean, of course, because this is, we don't know how true these reports are, given the contrasting stories that we saw earlier saying that everything seemed peachy and that it was only a case of Lewis signing the deal. But what are your thoughts on this? Because it looks like it's not all as we thought originally.
I have no doubt whatsoever that we will be seeing Lewis Hamilton take part in testing representing Mercedes. I have no doubt about that happening. But what I find a little bit intriguing is that I personally feel that George Russell's performances at the Sakir Grand Prix have actually contributed to a bit of a bargaining chip for Mercedes when it comes to negotiations, because at the end of the day, this is a business transaction. If you just put it in black and white terms, it is a business transaction, and the performance of Russell has given them a bargaining chip. I feel that that's probably the narrative that Mercedes are going with when it comes to negotiations. They're probably in a mindset that, as fantastic as Lewis is, everything he's achieved, they can probably say that, you know what, if you don't like what we're offering you, we can offer a contract to George Russell or pursue Max Verstappen even for 2022. So they've got a little bit more power when it comes to negotiating with Lewis, as they would have if this scenario had occurred this time last year.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And as you mentioned, the Sakir Grand Prix really showed everyone what George Russell can really do when given the right machinery. And I think Mercedes probably learned more from that than anybody else did, in the sense that, George was able to demonstrate his abilities in a way that he deputized for Lewis Hamilton in a one-off race. Imagine what he could do given the full backing for a few seasons with that Mercedes team, and they could find themselves the next Lewis Hamilton, if you like, or in the way that Ferrari were looking at Kimi Raikkonen post Michael Schumacher, as a guy to sort of take the mantle on. And you're right, Courtney, it's given them a position where Mercedes have the best car, and I don't expect that to change in 2021. So sorry to you guys hoping for a shake-up of the pecking order. I just don't see that happening, at least until 2022. And then on top of that, they also have Valtteri Bottas, who's staying on for another season, who would love a long-term contract at Mercedes. And if Lewis was out of the picture, Valtteri would have won the World Championship in the last few seasons. And I don't expect that to change. Valtteri's performances have been good, a B+ level, but it's only Lewis that's really been the issue for him in the machinery that he has. And of course, if George Russell was to take over from Lewis Hamilton, then it's a different problem. But ultimately, what Mercedes have is the best car, some of the best drivers, arguably one of the best young drivers, and they're in a scenario where they don't feel that they have to be held to ransom by Lewis Hamilton. Not saying that Lewis will do that, but it's all part of the negotiation process between both sides. Lewis is going to want the best contract possible before he eventually retires. How long that would be, we don't know. And Mercedes are going to want to make sure that they can secure Lewis's services with as little hit financially to them as possible. But at the same time, if they can't afford to keep Lewis, then they've got all the resources they need to maintain their success. So it's a very interesting situation that we find ourselves in. And I think the best way to look at it, and I've already mentioned this already, why Lewis Hamilton might not necessarily be able to get everything he wants from this contract, assuming he signs it, is the fact that Ferrari in 2006 managed to they didn't keep Schumacher on. They managed to force him out to bring in Kimi Räikkönen because they felt the time was right. So for any of you Lewis Hamilton fans or any fans in general think that Lewis Hamilton is irreplaceable, well, if Michael Schumacher wasn't irreplaceable at Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton is going to be in the same boat with Mercedes. So I'm sure there's going to be some concessions on both sides. I'm sure the optimum solution for both sides would be to, sign that extension. But this could get very interesting. Assuming that these reports are correct and accurate, this may have a few more chapters to go before we get to preseason testing. I mean, I don't think we've ever been in a position before, Courtney, where preseason testing's come along and we've had a team run a driver that wasn't contracted to the team in one way or another, or at least unemployed in this case. So that would be very interesting to see what Mercedes do if we get to preseason testing and Lewis Hamilton doesn't have a contract with the team. I mean, what would you think they would do?
It's very difficult to imagine. As you said, it's a bit of a bizarre situation, but there doesn't seem to be any stress coming from either camp on the matter. So it does seem that they're probably in the latter stages of negotiations. But yeah, if that was to happen, you imagine they'd be looking at George Russell. I imagine he'd be the first option for them, and if that was to happen, I'm sure there'd be excitement from a lot of people, shall we say, for George. But we can't forget how talented Lewis is, and how much of a big name he is. He's achieved so much, and it isn't just because of the car. That's just my opinion. He's been achieving a lot, even when he didn't have the best car. But from a F1 fan perspective, it'd be a shame to see Lewis go, of course. But from a business perspective, you're thinking of Mercedes as a business, they need to be thinking long term as much as they need to be thinking about the short term. So they do have options like George and Max Verstappen, because I have no doubts if Mercedes were to offer Max Verstappen that Mercedes seat, he'd be jumping at the chance. So it just seems, as I said before, it just seems that Lewis has kind of lost negotiation power a lot more than he has compared to last season.
And there's absolutely nothing that Lewis can do to strengthen his position because, as we said already, because Mercedes have far and above the best car, it's not like Lewis can sort of dangle that proverbial carrot of Ferrari at Mercedes, because Ferrari at this point in time are no longer an immediate threat to Mercedes. And even at Red Bull, if there was still a seat available there, that still wouldn't work, because Red Bull, despite the improvements they've made in the coming years, still are only just a thorn in Mercedes' side on the occasion in Verstappen, and maybe Perez next season. We'll have to wait and see. So it's a very strange situation to find Lewis Hamilton in. And I don't have any doubts that they're going to come to a compromise and agreement. But, Lewis doesn't seem fazed by this. I don't think Toto Wolff sees fazed by this either. This is one of those where you might find a couple of years ago, Toto Wolff would pop over to Lewis's house or vice versa. They just thrash it out then and there. And Lewis himself does like to negotiate his own deals. Of course, Lewis won't be doing that in person because of COVID, but, nonetheless, it is a very interesting situation. As I said, I can't imagine a situation or a scenario where Lewis Hamilton does not sign a new deal with Mercedes, because if he doesn't, not only does Mercedes not have him in their team, but we lose him altogether. And that's just a ridiculous situation to be in. One thing I did want to bring up, though, Courtney, because we mentioned the 40 million euros per season, which would be the highest wage of any driver in the sport. I think Lewis is already the highest earner in the sport anyway. Franz Tost, about a month or so ago, mentioned about the salary cap and that it should be introduced into Formula One, and that something like this should be governed properly because the drivers earn way too much. Now, 40 million euros or pounds, or whatever you want to call it, is an obscene amount of money to pay someone in sports. Now, of course, there are plenty of caveats to say, well, these guys risk their lives. People don't understand how dangerous this is, and therefore they should be paid the amount of money that they're worth. And then, of course, in addition to that, it's all negotiation. If someone's going to offer you 40 million pounds to do what you do, then you'd be an idiot to turn that down, unless that's just how it goes. So you can't berate Lewis for that. But where do you stand on a potential salary cap? Because whilst one doesn't exist, do you feel that it would be a good idea to introduce something like that for the sport, or do you feel that they should just control the financial regulations as they will do with the cost cap, and of course the salaries are going to be separate from that anyway?
Yeah, I think it depends in the direction the sport goes. So if they're going in a direction where, there's a lot of profit and, there's a lot of money to spare, then yeah, of course, you should be giving the biggest money to the biggest drivers, because at the end of the day, you should be rewarded for how good you are at something. But if they are going to continue with cutting costs for the teams to keep teams in the sport and to keep the grid as competitive as possible, then yeah, then salary caps do need to be looked at. So yeah, it just depends it just depends where Formula One are going in the future financially, in my opinion.
And in terms of cost efficiency, I think it's important to have this conversation, not necessarily implement a salary cap, because it'd be a difficult place to, where would you put it? Because as F1 moves into this new era of racing in 2022, where the cars are going to be a lot closer together, there's obviously going to be less room for the bigger teams to use their financial muscle to try and gain an advantage. One of the upsides, or one thing that they will be able to do until this is addressed, is offer more money to the drivers that they want to entice them to come to their team. So there's always going to be that element until a cost cap of any sort is introduced for salaries, where they can offer, let's say Lewis Hamilton, for example, offering that 40 million a year or 50 million a year, whatever it is that he wants. Whereas a team like, let's say Haas, just picking one out of the blue here, and they all of a sudden have a great car that can compete for a championship, but they want a Lewis Hamilton, but they can only afford half of that. And of course, this is where the dilemma comes, where you still have the bigger teams being able to offer serious amounts of money more than some of the other teams will be able to, because those costs are not included as part of the cost cap. So it's that element that I feel that F1 does need to look into. But in terms of introducing a salary cap, as I said, this is a very sensitive subject, and a lot of reasons for and against as to why perhaps a salary cap should be included. And I think on top of that,
I think you covered everything perfectly there.
Well, I was going to.
You've
sorry, I was
covered everything perfectly there. But yeah, it's, as I said, I just think when it comes down to this whole debate, it just depends on where Formula One is going long term, and not even just Formula One. It's where Mercedes are going long term and where the sport's going in general. I just think it's just very interesting where Lewis is in a point of his career where he's getting older. There's no doubt in that he's doing, on the personal level, he's doing as well as possible. But it just looking long term, it's just the way life works. He's getting older now, and he is losing negotiation power. So it'd just be interesting to see what kind of conclusion they come to.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think it's important to mention, whilst we're on this subject, for you guys, obviously, that are weighing in, let us know in the comment section below. But a word of caution to anyone, because all I've seen on social media on this topic is the extremes on both sides, whether you're for or against it. And all I want to say, guys, is look, it's okay if you are in favor of this or favor of a salary cap, or that Lewis Hamilton shouldn't be earning the amount that he's earning, irrespective to all drivers, not just Lewis, then that's fine. If you are one of those that feel that Lewis deserves every penny that he earns from the sport, that's absolutely fine as well. I don't see why what a driver earns or what a driver is trying to push for in negotiations, considering the fact that the team might be prepared to pay that to him. I don't see what's wrong with having that sort of opinion, whether you're for or against it.
You know what, though, Adam? When it comes to Lewis, look, everyone's entitled to their opinions on people. I'll be honest, I'm just tired of seeing people slag him off all the time over every little thing he does.
Well, it's
actually boring.
Well, it's not just that.
It doesn't matter. It does seem that like whatever's going on in the world, like it just seems like there could be, like, for example, like the world is, like, particularly UK, is like in a grips of a crisis when it comes to COVID. Yet people still have time to slag Lewis off for, like, I don't know, for the lead he walks his dog in. They seem obsessed with the geezer. Let it go.
Oh yeah, no.
Sorry, I had to get it off my chest.
No, you're right. It's a huge talking point. As a public figure, and everything that he's achieved, in particular this year, or 2020, I should say. But I mean, my point is that it's absolutely fine if you're not a Lewis Hamilton fan. But then at the flip side, if you are a Lewis Hamilton fan, I don't want this to sound the wrong way, because, Lewis has achieved so much in the sport. He's in a fantastic role model for it. But it's okay for people to have opinions of Lewis Hamilton where they're not really a fan of his, as long as they're legitimate, as long as they're not knocking him for.
It seemed to get that's right.
And, because I see it on both sides on social media. I see people extremes in defending Lewis as if the man can do no wrong. Like, he's not Jesus or anything like that. He's not a perfect human being. Everyone has flaws. So it's one of those where it's okay to offer a fair critique of Lewis Hamilton in a certain situation, like the salary cap, for example, if you're not really a fan of not necessarily him, but any driver getting paid that amount of money, because it's happened in the past. I remember Michael Schumacher used to, haggle for that kind of money. And that was back in the early 2000s. So you can imagine how much he would have been haggling for now. As a sportsman, if you are going to be offered that kind of money and someone's prepared to pay that kind of money for you, then you're going to take it. I don't think anyone would turn down that kind of money to stay where you are in a perfect environment if you can get it. If you know your worth, go get it. And I'm pretty sure Lewis knows his worth better than anyone else does, and he will be determined to try and get the best contract for himself. Hopefully, he signs it and stays on. That's what we want to see. We want to see Lewis for a few more years yet. We're not quite ready to let that one go. But moving on, I should say, obviously, talking about Lewis Hamilton, let us know what you think in the comments below, whether or not you think he will stay or whether he will not sign that contract. We'll have to wait and see. But let's move on to the next story in this discussion, Courtney, and that is the future of the Australian Grand Prix. Now, some reports coming out recently, obviously, because of the increase in COVID cases and obviously the struggles that the world collectively are having in dealing with this virus, or at least the new strain of it from what we understand, it seems that the organisers of the Australian Grand Prix are seriously considering postponing the event until later on in 2021. And the main reason for this, Courtney, is because they want to avoid a situation where it's a race where there are no fans, because of course they didn't have the Australian Grand Prix last year. It was the first race to get cancelled after what had happened with the chaos that followed, to a point where it looked like the race was going to go ahead despite all of the warning signs, and then eventually it didn't. Now they're in a situation where they've obviously got to weigh up whether or not it's worth going through with it now or postponing it. And of course, as I said, the main catalyst is not being able to get the fans in. And they don't really, with all respect, they don't really want to get fans from across the world, from other countries that are dealing with COVID issues a lot more severely, or suffering a lot more severely than Australia are, because Australia are one of the better countries at handling this. They don't want an influx of fans from all over the world bringing the virus with them and creating a scenario where F1's race is seen as a super spreader event, if you like. So, I mean, what do you make of this story, Courtney? Is it a surprise to you? Are you concerned that this may be, we may end up seeing a lot more races with no fans as we did last season? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I believe that when it comes to COVID, it seems that the Australians are being particularly strict of it. And with all due respect, I agree with that. You can't blame them, really. I think the biggest question I'm asking right now is, with the situation with COVID now in the UK, we're in a bit of a weird situation where, in terms of the cases and the spread of the virus, it seems we are in a terrible position right now. But we have a massive light of hope when it comes to a vaccine. The Oxford, what's it called? AstraZeneca. That's it. Yes. AstraZeneca vaccines just started rolling out today. And fingers crossed, if everything goes well, we could have a vulnerable vaccinated by the end of March, come early April. But a lot of countries aren't in that position. And I imagine Australia will be one of those. So I'm looking to the start of the season, and I'm looking at some of the circuits, not only the Australian Grand Prix, but other street circuits like Montreal and Monaco. Are we going to be in a position where we see these Grand Prix get cancelled again? Because at the end of the day, these are in cities, and even Baku, these are in cities. And if you bring an influx of people that could potentially be infected, you're going to see flare-ups in their countries. So you can understand why they wouldn't want that to happen. So the biggest question I'm asking right now is, first of all, are they going to cancel these other circuits if the virus doesn't become suppressed by that point? And could they possibly replace the Australian Grand Prix with a second Bahrain Grand Prix like we saw last season? It's a possibility.
Certainly is. And, Bahrain, it's interesting that you mentioned Bahrain, because there have been talks about the possibility of moving preseason testing over to Bahrain, not just for the weather aspect of it. And Bahrain is, in truth, a test circuit, but it's a good venue. I mean, they used to test in Bahrain years ago. I remember back in last time I think F1 tested in Bahrain was back in 2009. I believe, before they went to Catalonia. Famously, that test was remembered for the fact that it was the Brawn team turned up literally a week after securing financial backing to keep the team going after Honda pulled the plug, and then ended up with a car that was 3/4 of a second faster than everyone else. And of course, the rest is history for that season. But yeah, they've been thinking about it, thinking of bringing it there because, of course, Bahrain, another country. It seems that the countries in that area, Asia and Oceania region, seems to be handling things a lot better, or at least having the better fortunes compared to Europe in terms of dealing with the virus. So there has been talks about possibly moving it there and also having the opening race of the season at Bahrain. And as we saw, they hosted two very successful and memorable Grand Prix. So, congratulations to everyone involved in that. And it's a definite possibility, Courtney, that we could see a scenario where we may have a double header at Bahrain straight away. I mean, I'd love to see them go around the Sakir GP circuit layout again. I thought that was enthralling with entertainment and drama, and it certainly created not just an F1, delivered. But in the F2 races were absolutely fantastic to watch as well, by contrast. And, it'd be good to see that again. It's more likely at this point in time that if we do get a test at Bahrain, which is, it's 50-50 on that one at the moment, but it's more likely with Australia that they will seek a postponement to the race and reschedule it for the winter period when we do go to the Asian and Oceania races towards the end of the season. So around October, November time, maybe. I think there's a few windows where they could slot that race back in. And as we said before, the main motivation for this is not just to have fans in the actual grandstands, for the race, because you don't want a street circuit without the fans. That kind of makes it what it is.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's to protect not only people from Australia, but fans that are actually going to the event, because they were very, very close to playing a risky game with this. And it was only until some of the inner personnel from the paddock that tested positive. I think it was a Mercedes mechanic and a few McLaren ones. They were literally prepared to have free practice get started like half an hour later, whilst fans were queuing up, not knowing that it was all going to be cancelled. So it's a difficult time. And, sport will do its absolute utmost to carry on. And I think we can all agree that Formula One and everyone involved in it did a fantastic job to bring us a 2020 season that was full of excitement, entertainment, and more importantly, was action-packed all year. It wasn't a lull period, and they got it all in such a condensed period as well. So I'm pretty sure they're not going to take any chances this season with a more familiar looking calendar. And they'll be making sure to guarantee the utmost safety and protection for everyone involved. So we'll have to wait and see. Fingers crossed on what happens with that one. But I'd be surprised at this point if an Australian Grand Prix goes ahead in March as expected, because more than anything else, the circuit layout has to be prepared no later than at the start of the end of January. They have to start doing it. It takes about a month or so to get it all ready. And I didn't realize it took that long. But yeah, if they don't start by the end of the month, then they won't have it in March. So we'll have to wait and see. We probably won't find out until the end of the month anyway. So we'll have to, fingers crossed. Obviously, let's hope we do get a race at Albon Park, because it's certainly one of my favourite tracks of the season. And
oh yeah, I love it. It's a fast flowing circuit.
Absolutely. And it is the curtain raiser for F1. It just, when you go to Albert Park, it definitely feels like, right, it's a new dawn, a new day. I'm not going to sing the Michael Bublé song, but yeah, it just feels like F1 is back and we're ready to go after that long winter break. So hopefully we'll have to wait and see what news comes from that, and hopefully for the best. But let's talk about, obviously we mentioned Mercedes, obviously what they're planning to do with their cars and that. We were chatting about this in the week, and I showed you a social media post from, I can't remember who the source was exactly, but they were basically citing the improvements that Mercedes apparently have made to their power units. And apparently they've made some changes to the internal combustion engine. They've also made some changes to their suspension as well. And one figure I did see quoted was around about, I think it was 50 brake horsepower. They mentioned they've been able to find, or taken their engine up to 1,050 brake horsepower. So it's rumored. I'm not going to lie, Courtney, when I saw that, my heart sunk. As much as I enjoy seeing what Mercedes have done, part of me is like, Jesus, guys, like, how many times can you break the ceiling and keep going? Like, surely you've done enough by now, but nope, they literally will carry on. plugging away and try and find those incremental marginal gains. And of course, remember, we haven't got DAS this season, so we'll have to wait and see how that affects Mercedes. But I mean, if that's true, Courtney, wow. Is there any point turning up for the season?
Well, what I'll say is let's try and take some positives from this scenario, right? So let's say Mercedes are as dominant as ever next season. There are reasons why they might not be. I'm sure we'll mention later, but let's try and take some positives from this because I've done some prep for this, haven't I? And I don't know. I'm just trying to take some positives from this, and one of them could we see McLaren closer to the front? I think a lot of people would like to see that, particularly with Danny Rick joining, who's very popular. And wouldn't it be great for Sebastian Vettel to go from a torrid season at Ferrari to having possibly one of the strongest cars on the grid? So, as sad as it would be for a lot of F1 fans who'd want to see a good battle between Lewis and Max at the front, let's take some positives from this possible situation because there are a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm definitely hoping that Seb has a really good season this year. This new project of Aston Martin, who, by the way, I knew they were going to do this. We talked about this last week with their announcement for the 1st of January 2021. Everyone was thinking, is it going to be a livery tease? Are they going to show us a concept they're going to put on an old car? No, all they did was change their social media handles and send us a little GIF. And I'm like guys, honestly, is that it? Sorry, am I supposed to be excited? Rest in whatever hangover I had from the night before. Yes,
we saw the race in green, so I think that's encouraging.
I'm prepared to forgive them just for that alone, because I know people are saying, it was cool having it pink and everything else, but there is nothing worse than the thought of having a pink Aston Martin on an F1 grid. And, I'm really excited to see what they've got in plan for this car. And, as you mentioned, Courtney, with all the upgrades that Mercedes have to their engine and everything else, which will be filtered down to their B and C teams, if you like, or customer teams in Racing Point McLaren. I mean, I joked saying that we may end up with a season where it's going to be Mercedes versus Racing Point versus McLaren, and then Red Bull are there and then everyone else. But given the gains that Mercedes will make on their power unit, which, again, I don't understand how it's possible they continue to do this, but you never know. And wouldn't it be great to see McLaren fighting for race wins again this next season? And of course, Sebastian Vettel fighting at the front, which I imagine he will be in that car. I don't have any reason to believe that's not going to happen.
Yeah, obviously, you could be seeing Sebastian go for podiums, even possibly wins, if Mercedes have a bad weekend. But I don't, even with these gains in the engine department, let's not completely make next season's championship a full-blown conclusion, because there's still a lot of unknowns about these 2021 Pirelli tyres. Mercedes could well struggle with them. So there are still a couple of big factors that could decide next season, even if Mercedes have made big gains in the engine department.
It will be interesting because, of course, the reduction in downforce, at least from the outset, will make life easier for the teams to manage the tyres, or at least the loads that get put into them. But having said that, the teams have been very vocal about this and have already started to knock the tyres and say they're not happy with them. And I don't understand how that's the case, because, I mean, how much running have they done with them? And they did them with the older cars. So, I mean, they already got rid of the tyres for 2020 and used the 2019 ones from before. They can't do that again, because as we saw, the cars were just putting too much load into the tyres, and any downforce that they do recapture is only going to make it difficult for them to manage tyre wear. So I have to wait and see what's going on. I don't know anywhere near enough about tyres. Despite what previous videos might suggest, I really don't. So it's a fascinating facet of Formula One tyres. It really is. They can literally make or break a race for a team and a driver, as we've so often seen. George Russell will certainly know what I'm talking about. So it's something we'll have to keep an eye on, but I think we're not going to really learn much about it until pre-season testing. So I think we'll leave our judgment on that until we get to pre-season testing. But speaking of judgment, do you remember so often this season I've constantly criticised Ferrari about their pit stops being the only thing that's in their control to get right, and they still struggle with? Well, it turns out that one of the main issues was the wheel nuts and the wheel nut guns that Ferrari had. Apparently, Sebastian Vettel and some of the mechanics were making complaints that these wheel nuts and these wheel guns that Ferrari had were inefficient, and they were causing them to have the slow 3-second plus pit stops when everyone else is doing all right. Well, fortunately for them, it's been approved for Ferrari to get new wheel nuts and guns for 2021, something that Haas were not able to benefit from in 2019 when they had a similar issue. So hopefully for them, that should allow them to have faster pit stops and will stop me complaining about every single thing that Ferrari are messing up with. So we can just focus on the car and the strategist rather than the pit stops. So, yeah, so that's
Adam,
good news.
I'd just like to I'd just like to congratulate you for finding a way to talk about Ferrari in this episode. Congratulations for that. Well done. Top marks.
I had my notes. I was, yeah.
But they if they are to improve, they need to sort out these things. So it might seem like a minor detail for some, but it is a big thing considering that you're right. They still found a way to be terrible. Something else given how bad their car was. So well done to them for that.
Yeah, it's every little bit helps. And of course, you know, Ferrari, one thing that they've struggled with in the few seasons that they've had when they've been in their sort of low underperforming period is it's important to make sure that they need to maximize every possible gain that they can make. And I think when it comes to the car, you turn up with either a great car or a bad car, and you learn very quickly which one of the two it's going to be. You have your drivers, which of course everything's in their own hands. You know, you can advise them and can help them as much as you can, but ultimately it's down to them to deliver the results, which to their credit, Ferrari have had for a long time. And in Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, I've got no doubts that that's going to continue. But when it comes to stuff like pit stops or setups and everything else, stuff that they are in control of, it does frustrate me that Ferrari are still making these careless mistakes, and with strategy as well, it must be said, when, you know, there's a lot of pressure on them to sort of deliver on the things that they can control. So it's a good thing to see that they are looking at these issues, and hopefully that does bear results. It might not make much of a difference, might be a 10th here or a 10th there, but it's Formula One. Winning and losing can be worth a 10th of a second or made up from that small margin. So hopefully Ferrari have found something. And, you know, on top of everything else that they've got to deal with over the winter break, we'll just have to wait and see what car rolls out wherever we go for pre-season testing. One last bit I did want to talk about on Ferrari before we move into the last part of the episode. Jock Clear, former chief strategist at Ferrari, he is now going to be working very, very closely with Mick Schumacher at Haas. So as I mentioned before, Haas are going to be benefiting from a more synergized relationship with Ferrari at Maranello, where they're going to have a base set up for a lot of their works. A lot of Ferrari personnel are being transferred over. And this is kind of what I like to call part of Project Schumacher. And Jock Clear, obviously a big name at Ferrari, is going to be moving over to Haas to help Mick with his development and work very closely with him. So it's good to see Mick Schumacher in particular getting that support and getting that help that Ferrari have obviously guaranteed him to aid his development. And I'm pretty sure with Jock Clear, Mick's got a very good mentor to work with to sort of help his next stage of development in Formula One. So yeah, the last part of the episode, let's talk briefly about Alex Albon. Now, Sergio Perez, as we know, got that seat for 2021 with Red Bull, leaving Alex in a position where he's just going to be a reserve for Red Bull, with, of course, the view that we expect him perhaps to get an opportunity at AlphaTauri in 2022 if they move Pierre Gasly on or Yuki Tsunoda gets promoted, whichever one comes first. But it seems that Alex is not going to be completely bored in terms of racing. He has managed to get a role in DTM racing. Now, I'm not sure what team it's for in particular, but it's good to see that Alex is going to be able to flex his muscles and keep busy, but it will not impact on his racing or any of his duties or commitments with Red Bull. So that's always a good sign to see. I don't know any thoughts you had on that one, Corny, with Alex.
When I spoke to you about this earlier, I basically said to you, if we've learned anything from 2020, and that is we need to keep our minds occupied from stopping us from going insane. So I'm really pleased that Alex has another project apart from just being a Red Bull reserve driver, because we don't know how much running he's going to get in a Red Bull car. It might be a part of the development. He might do some testing away from the weekends, but he's not going to be regularly involved. So it's really good for him that he's going to keep himself mentally occupied and keep himself fresh and, you know, put himself in a race for a seat at one of the Red Bull teams if things don't go well for one of their current drivers.
Absolutely, and it will keep him fresh. And DTM has been a very, very good series for some Formula One drivers, and ex-Formula One drivers are like the likes of Paul di Resta and Anthony Davidson, sort of keeping their racecraft fresh. And Paul still races regularly in DTM as well, and rather successful. So, and of course, let's not forget Jenson Button, who was recently a champion in a DTM series. So, Alex is going to be in good hands. And it's good to see that he'll be keeping his racing prowess in good order as and when Red Bull will need him for next season, but it certainly won't impact on his duties there, which I'd imagine is going to be fairly busy. And I think Alex, after what he's learned this season and how difficult it's been, is definitely going to want to atone for that and remind Red Bull that he is more than capable enough to be in that team for the years ahead. But
And maybe even remind himself.
Yes, I think
more importantly, remind himself.
Absolutely. I think his confidence has taken a massive hit, as Pierre Gasly's did the season before. And of course, moving to AlphaTauri, pastures new, it did him a lot of good, a much more nurturing environment. And I think perhaps with less pressure on Alex's shoulders in the reserve role, if you like, on the bleachers, I think you may see a better driver out of it. Because I don't think, we talked about Alex Albon, and of course, we've got a video coming on that soon about how he never really demonstrated or showed Red Bull that he was capable, with the exception perhaps of Abu Dhabi. But I think it's fair to say, like Pierre Gasly, Red Bull, other than giving him plenty of opportunities, I don't think they really gave him everything that he needed to nurture his talent and give him that perfect environment, whilst also trying to maximize Max's chances in Grand Prix. Of course, Red Bull did learn from the mistakes they made with Gasly. It did a lot more to support Albon. But ultimately, they never really were able to find that right balance. And I think Red Bull, hopefully in Perez, will be able to manage the situation better and understand how to manage two top drivers in their team, rather than have an outstanding number one and then just have the other guy who's expected to be the rear gunner. But you need to give him that help and support if he's a young guy trying to make his way in the team like Verstappen did years ago. So, yeah, let's hope for the best for Albon, and hopefully this will do him some good going into 2022, whichever direction his future in F1 decides to go. So, I think that's pretty much everything we wanted to cover in this episode. It's a bit different of an episode to what we're used to. We don't really focus on gossip columns too much. We tend to deal with, what we know and what is actually going on. But let us know what you think, guys. Of course, if there are other things you want us to talk about in the gossip column or do a few more episodes like this during the winter break, then please do let us know. And also, as a little task for you guys, put in the comments section below, seeing as it's our 50th episode, which moments that you've enjoyed of this DNF1 F1 podcast from 2020. List some of your favorite moments. It's always fun to sort of reminisce. I mean, it's crazy to think that we've done 50 episodes now, and we're very much approaching our first anniversary as well. So, Courtney, I think you were going to...
I know my favourite moment though, Adam. I'm not sure if it's yours.
Do tell. Go on.
Yeah, so this is from one of our earlier episodes. So for one of the for some of you bigger fans out there that have been following us from the start, this was during first lockdown, the one we had in March through till June, and Lando Norris was taking part in the online racing, wasn't he? And he called a couple of his friends on stream. So I thought I would do my bit and call a couple of my friends, and I think the call particularly for my friend Cameron, golden. I'll tell you what, Adam, we might have to get him on sometime soon, because that call was brilliant. Please go back to that earlier episode and check it out. For me, it was brilliant.
Oh yeah, Cameron is certainly a character. I've met him a few times. Nice guy, but not a Formula One guy, but he's certainly a character worth having on. No, as an house. Yeah, I think that's definitely one of my favourite moments as well. I wouldn't say it was my absolute one. I'd probably have to go back through the archives and have a look to try and let you guys know which one was my favourite out-and-out moment, but it's certainly up there. But do let us know, guys, in the comment section if you've been following us for a while, which has been your favourite moments. And of course, let us know if you'd like us to do more gossip column episodes, if you like, and what stuff you'd like us to talk about. But until then, guys, thank you for tuning in. Stay safe, of course, in difficult times. Don't forget to subscribe as well. We want you guys to subscribe to this channel. If you like what you see, give the video a like as well and subscribe. Join our DNF1 family. We've got plenty to look forward to in 2021. Stuff we couldn't do last year, but we're definitely looking forward to bringing that out to you this year, because you guys deserve all that we can give for you on this podcast as well. So thank you very much for tuning in. Courtney, as always, thank you for joining me on this episode, and great stuff as always. And until then, guys, stay safe, and we will see you in the next DNF1 F1 podcast.
See you soon.